What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Adventures in DevOps. I'm your host for today, Will Button. Joining me in the studio, my co-host, back for, what is this, episode number 3, Warren?
Let's call it 3.
We'll call it 3. Yeah, right on. I'm excited. It's starting to look like a trend here.
Yeah, I'm Warren, I'm CTO at Authoress. Thanks for inviting me on. I know I said I promised just 1 or 2 episodes, and this is 3. So, I think this trend is going in a good direction, and I hopefully will be on future ones as well.
Cool. I hope so, because I'm enjoying having you here on the show. And joining us also in the studio today, we have the DevOps activist from Dynatrace, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation ambassador, and host of the Pure Performance podcast. And I can validate this because if you're not familiar with the podcasting industry, there is actually a secret handshake used by all podcast hosts around the world. And I did validate this, so I can confirm that this is actually the legit non-chat GPT Andy Grabner joining us on the show. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you so much for having me. I know that AI technology is pretty good already, but I'm not sure if they can simulate my accent. Yeah, so that's definitely
right. And if you're joining us on the live stream, you can actually see Andy as well as Warren and myself, and we can do the test as well to show that it's a real legitimate background. Yeah. Not just an artificial background behind us.
My leaves move here. Yeah.
Right. I can walk behind my kitchen counter, but I need to take off my headset quickly, and then I'll show you.
Right? Yeah. Same thing.
There we go.
Perfect. Successful test. Can confirm that we are not a robot.
Yeah.
Cool. So welcome to the show. So you've been doing the Pure Performance podcast for 7 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's about 7 years, even maybe almost close to 8 years. We had last week, I believe, it was the 201st episode.
Oh, nice.
We have released, yeah. And it's been exciting, and if you look back, it's actually quite astonishing that we've been doing this for that long. And with we, I also mean Brian Wilson, my co-host, and myself. So Brian is not here today, but yeah, thanks, Brian.
Right. So for anyone who's not familiar with your podcast, give us the short summary of what you talk about on there.
Yeah. So we initially started it because both Brian and I, we've been in the performance engineering space for 20 plus years now. Right? It's been a long, long time. We both work at Dynatrace, even though the podcast is not related to the product or the services we sell, but it's basically based on our experience and what we see out there. So we started initially to talk about what are the performance problems that we see in modern day applications. Why are applications crashing? Why are applications slow? What are the most common things that we see? How can we educate our listeners, which we initially thought are mainly developers and performance testers? What can we teach them? But over the 7 years, things have changed. And because our field of topics has changed and evolved, and we moved from performance engineering to DevOps, to cloud native, to Kubernetes, to platform engineering. We covered a lot of range of topics, and we also had over the years many interesting guests, a lot of practitioners, also people that you see on big stage in the IT. So yeah, it's been quite interesting, and I think a broad range of topics, and hopefully there's something in there for everyone.
Right on. So you mentioned that you said your podcast audience initially was performance specialists and practitioners, and you've seen that change over the years?
Yeah, because also we changed, right? And with we, I mean Brian and we have changed. And the reason why we changed is because obviously we, day in and day out, we deal and we work with our community. That's the Dynatrace community, the observability community. And because our product and capabilities have evolved, so have the people we interact with, they have changed. And we see nowadays more and more enterprise architects, we see cloud architects, we see people that are responsible for big Kubernetes clusters. We see people that are very heavily engaged in the CNCF community, like I am, in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation community. So we're inviting a lot of kind of my counterparts to the podcast and discuss topics that are relevant in the cloud native ecosystem. And so, that's why it has changed. But we always try to come back and kind of relate it to performance, because in the end, we all want to make sure that we help the global community to build performant and resilient systems.
What was new 8 years ago? Like, what was the topic of conversation what was performance importance? What were you talking about back then?
I think episode number 1, 2, and 3, or at least the first handful, I believe, we're all focusing on what are the top performance problems in Java and .NET applications, because these were kind of like the two predominant technologies we were still dealing with, right? And we still are seeing a lot of Java and .NET. And because Brian and I were doing a lot of load and performance testing and a lot of performance analysis on these type of applications, we said, let's discuss what are the key things we find in applications, in Java and .NET applications, that make applications fail, crash, be slow, and talk about it and educate our listeners.
So you have a secret love for the CLR then?
I would maybe the word love doesn't come to mind as a first thing, but sure. Yeah, but I mean, the interesting thing is, right, it's in the end, everything we discussed and all the patterns we found, or let's say most of them, are not limited to a runtime. Or let's say you only see certain patterns in Java or .NET, because patterns are patterns and they happen whether you are developing. We just did an episode recording that I think will come out next week on mainframe, right? So we also cover mainframe, and we see similar patterns that lead to problematic software in the mainframe versus Java.NET, and now going all the way forward, things we see in the highly distributed world of Kubernetes. So same patterns.
I want to ask about that real quick, because one of the patterns I've seen throughout my career is a tendency to blame the stack for performance issues. Like a really common one is, oh, we wrote this in Java, but that's not performance, so we're moving to .NET, or insert any other technology you want in there. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest for humans is to blame somebody else, right?
Right.
And the reason why that is, I believe, is because we as an industry, I think we try to make it as easy as possible for engineers to write code. And easy means we are abstracting things away. We're abstracting the complexity away. And therefore, when you abstract things away, you allow people to build things very fast in a generic way, but not optimized or optimizable for the specific use case. And so when people say, this would be 50 times faster if I move to runtime X or Y, then I would argue that this is only true if you actually change the implementation underneath, right? If you are using, if you're replacing the Hibernate with the AD.NET Entity Framework, you will still run into the same problem, because these are all very generic frameworks. But if you don't use them and optimize them for your use case, you will still end up with the N+1 query problem, capturing and fetching too much data that gets into memory, that again gets filtered and parsed in memory, which leads to too much memory usage, high garbage collection, high CPU, bad performance. So my answer to this is, if you want to build really high performant applications, you need to understand what's actually happening in your stack, right? How, what type of data do you need? Where do you get the data from? How do you get it in efficient way? What type of data do you even need? Because otherwise you will end up with the same problem in any runtime. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And best case, even if it does fix whatever hypothetical problem you have at that moment, you're probably just creating a whole bunch of other ones that are not seen because of the switch, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think we are living in an interesting situation right now. I mean, when I kind of grew up sounds like strange. When I got educated on software engineering, I started in high school. I was lucky enough to have an education system here where one of our local high school was specialized in software engineering. And we learned assembler, we learned C, we learned and then we learned like how to move bits around and how to manage memory yourself. And these are traits now that I think are probably, I'm not sure if they're still taught, but I think the necessity of, if somebody comes in new and wants to become a software engineer, especially because it's such a high demand, I will probably not start with assembler. I probably won't start with managing my memory myself, but I will start with a higher abstraction because I want to be productive. I want to contribute, and with that, it means that I may miss things and I do things that later on will lead into a problem because I don't know the underlying stack and what's really happening.
I've seen the problem go the other way though, right? Like starting to play directly with threads or whatever the underlying is because you think you can do it better. And maybe today it is true, especially in some larger organizations, but then the industry or open source or whatever the language you're using, framework of choice, evolves over time and comes up with a much better agreed upon strategy than whatever you're using. You must have seen that as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, trading is another perfect example, right? I mean, that's many horror stories or problematic stories. And by the way, I don't want to make the impression or give the impression that I know how to really code extremely highly efficient code. I've just seen many examples from other people that have built apps, and I could help them identify those issues. So please, if you listen to this, don't hire me to build a highly efficient system.
When you just everyone's on the same page, when you say performance or high performance, are there sort of numbers that go along with that give us a good viewpoint into what that actually looks like?
This can be anything from systems that can handle, I don't know, thousands or millions requests per minute, per hour, right? Highly transaction volume. But this can also mean systems that have lower transaction volume, but that need to process terabytes of data. Batch processes, if you think about it, and batch processes have to finish in a certain time because otherwise you may run out of a window of opportunity. Or there's even regulations where, like especially in the finance and the energy sector, I know I've just worked with a client there, they have to finish processing all of their transactions. They do it in a batch at a certain time because otherwise they're not allowed to trade the next day. And so this may mean they don't have, let's say, millions of transactions, but they have transactions that are bigger in data that needs to be processed and validated, and external systems need to be contacted and updated. So highly performant systems really means whether you can deliver what your end users are expecting from your system. And end users can be real users that try to book an online ticket at a show that is highly on demand, or it can be other systems that call an API and expect when they call your API that it will deliver the result in a certain amount of time. And that time could be seconds, but it could also be maybe an hour, but there's a certain expectation to a system.
You triggered my curiosity there with the regulation. Like there must be different observability importance that happen in a system like that, where it's not about necessarily the reliability of individual pieces or requests that come in, but over the whole data set. Like that's not a world that's really familiar with me. So any insight you've got there would be super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that comes to mind here, it's really, we talk about data integrity, obviously, right? I mean, from an observability perspective, it's not just that, as you said, the individual pieces of code that get executed to do certain things work. I mean, obviously they should work reliably, but in the end-to-end business process needs to produce a result. So for instance, a very simple example, if I would wire you money, then I want to make sure that if I wire you money and it goes through, it ends up on your bank account.
Me too.
If something if for whatever reason, something happens in the middle and something crashes, that the money doesn't just end up somewhere in a random account. So I think this is also very important that we think about end-to-end data pipeline observability. This is another a big topic. Business process monitoring. There's different terms, I think, for these things. But in the end, you want to make sure that whatever you do, you end up with the result that you expect, and that proper resiliency and proper error handling is taken care of. And at the end, the data on both sides of the system is valid and accurate. Yeah.
Makes sense.
So you mentioned that some of your listeners are architects, and it sounds like some of the performance conversation has been shifted from reactionary to further up in the design process. How do you define, or what are your thumb rules for designing a performant application without getting into premature optimization?
It's a good one, yeah. And then Warren is smiling. Yeah, I hear him. So I think what I learned, and I remember what I said earlier. When I went to high school, I was educated as a software engineer, and we were never educated, unfortunately, back then, to think about how to measure and observe if my software is actually doing what it's supposed to do. Where we never, because it was in the mid-90s, and I'm sure we wrote log files, but we didn't ever think about metrics and traces nowadays and things like that. So what I can advertise now, or advocate for, and what I see is observability as a requirement, observability-driven development, which means if I'm building a new service, if I'm building a new app, if I'm building a new function, whatever it is, I should not only care about what this function does, but also how I can validate and measure whether the function, execute in the expected time, with the expected resiliency. So that means what happens if my dependencies fail, how do I react? So it's really about thinking with observability as a non-functional requirement. And because first of all, it helps me as an engineer to later on validate that my stuff actually works as expected. It helps me if something doesn't work as expected, that I can troubleshoot if I have the logs, the traces, the metrics that I need. But it also helps me to justify my work, because if somebody comes to me and say, Andy, we need a new social media platform, right? We have already too many of them, but let's say social media platform. And what's the measure of success? How do we, differentiate ourselves with the others that are out there? So we want to have some metrics. And one could be better user experience, faster posting, easier APIs so that others can integrate better with my social media platform. And then I need to say, okay, if I'm developing it, I also want to make sure that we can measure that the system is really used, and the hypothesis that we have that our system will be adopted better because we are faster, more resilient, is actually, the hypothesis works. And so what I see now more and more is this, pushing observability into the minds of architects, of developers early on, of people that build frameworks, of people that build new libraries, that observability is baked in and not an afterthought. I think that's very important.
Yeah, for sure. I've spent many decades at this point working in early stage startups, and I think that's been one of the most critical mistakes in a lot of the startups I've been involved with, is failing to define what I call it the success criteria. Mm-hmm. So you build this product and you launch it, but then you don't have this definition of success to tell you that your product is being consumed, utilized, and implemented the way that you thought it was going to. And so now you're off building your company in this direction, and your potential customers are off going in this direction, and you never identify that gap, which ultimately is bad for your startup.
Yeah, exactly. Because, and especially as a startup, you have obviously limited resources, and you need to make sure that you are putting your resources where you have the most impact. But if you cannot measure the impact, and if you don't know what's your North Star, like where do you need to go, then you're just running potentially in circles.
Yeah, till you run out of cash.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you're lucky enough, you sell whatever you have left and start something new, right? And then you become a serial entrepreneur. It's also great.
I mean, you run into the problem sometimes there, though, that you're successful in spite of your mistakes. And then you get to tell a great story about all the things you did right. And then people go and copy you.
True. True. Yeah.
Cool. So in your work over at the CNCF, what does a typical day as an ambassador look like there, and how does that relate to your podcast? Because I think there's probably a correlation there
Mhm.
of your public presence or your public presence aligned with an open project like CNCF.
Mhm. Yeah. So first of all, I'm really grateful that the CNCF gave me the opportunity to be an ambassador. And just for those people that don't know how this works, you have to apply to become an ambassador. An ambassador really means to work with the community, to help the community to grow, to help new members that come in to find their way around, to help them contribute, become just part of the community, right? And you also have to reapply for the ambassadorship because it's always a year. So we just had to reapply, and now we need to keep fingers crossed that we did everything right. Now, how does this relate to my podcast? Since I've been an ambassador, I've obviously been more connected or better connected with project leaders in the CNCF. And for instance, we just had an episode of Pure Performance around the open source project Kepler, a CNCF project. We also just recorded an episode on Argo, which is a very prominent player in the CNCF. And so me being an ambassador gives me the chance to easier connect with these different project teams, with the project leads, with the maintainers, and then I offer them a platform to promote their work, right? And also hopefully help with this grow the CNCF ecosystem and the CNCF community, yeah, and educate them. And it's a win-win situation because in the end, if you look at the CNCF, it's a big landscape. If you look at the CNCF landscape, our industry, we try to figure out how we build platforms on top of Kubernetes, the base platform, and then picking the right tools. And so my goal is to educate on how to build platforms in the end that make people successful. So platforms that allow developers to push out code faster. The big topic for us is always observability. How can we make sure that everything we build on top of Kubernetes is observable by default? What does this then mean for Argo, for Flux, for Open Feature, for Kepler, some of these tools, that I had represented on my podcast. And so we educate people on how to choose these tools, but also get observability by default when they decided to choose these tools in their landscape.
Right on, because to apply to be a CNCF project, there's criteria you have to meet, right? And there's like an incubation process, and you have these certain goals that you have to meet in order to get to that graduated status. Is that correct?
Exactly. You start with the sandbox. So that's kind of like the first phase of it. And then you need to prove that you have real adopters, meaning that people that are really using your project in a production environment. You need to have people that are maintaining the project, that are contributing to the project. So you need to kind of prove that this is a viable project that does not only depend on a single person, right? Because that could obviously be if somebody's very enthusiastic and builds a great framework or a library or project, but it's one person. What happens if this person is hit by the legendary bus, right? So that's why you wanna build an ecosystem and a community, and you need to prove it. And once you prove this, then you get into the incubation status and then into the graduate status. Exactly. So that's how the CNCF defines the different maturity levels. The details of the criteria, I don't know them. I cannot recite them by heart, but I'm pretty sure there's a website we can link to.
Get it tattooed on your forearm.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's actually a sci-fi movie waiting to happen there, because we talk about the bus factor. I bet we could make like a Stephen King style sci-fi book or movie about this haunted bus that just travels around the world taking out solo founders.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. Side quest. Sorry, it was just a tangent.
No, there's the XKCD with a small little self-contained component that everyone's depending on that's holding up a mess of architecture. So
Yeah.
I think you would see like civilization crumble very quickly in that regard. It's post-apocalyptic film for sure.
So how many years have you been a CNCF ambassador?
Well, I am now applying for my second year, so it's
Okay.
still in my first year.
Right on. Cool.
And so I'm still a baby, I guess, in that
Yeah.
in that respect. But no, it's been good. And as I said, I just reapplied, and so we will see if they will let me in again. They also, so with the CNCF, right, the ambassador program, they also we have regular check-ins where we basically show what we've done in order to contribute back to the CNCF in order to qualify to be a good ambassador, not just to use the title for nothing. Besides
Right.
doing the podcast, I speak at different meetups and conferences, especially KCDs, Kubernetes Community Days these days. The topic that I'm currently kind of promoting and advocating for is the whole topic of platform engineering. So I was really lucky to then, I think also the ambassador title helped a little bit to be picked as a speaker at some of these local events that we have here in Europe. It's hopefully you will have me back at some point, and then you can ask me the question and say, how long have you been an ambassador? And I can say 17 years now. And then I will ask you, why did it take 17 years for you to call me back on that podcast?
Well, currently I can use the excuse that my email's down, but
if it's down for 17 years, I think we have a problem.
He'll go fully off the grid at that point.
Is it really a problem though if my email doesn't get fixed?
Yeah. As long as Slack and everything else works.
How did you get from, I don't know if your podcast is related to this, but you started the podcast almost 8 years ago, and now you're CNCF ambassador. Like, what was the path here?
The path here, it's a good question. So when we started the podcast, funny story is that we had a very close friend, one of my and Brian's close friends, Mark Tomlinson. He actually encouraged us back then to start the podcast. He had his own podcast, was called Perf Bytes. He also talked about performance. And then he said, hey, why don't you just start a podcast? And then Brian asked me, he said, hey, do you want to do it? And what does it take? And who do we need to ask for permission? And I said, you know what, let's just do it and ask for forgiveness later in case somebody's not happy with it. And that actually worked out pretty well. So we just started with pure performance. And what Brian, again, thank you, Brian, for all that he's doing, because I just need to talk, and he's doing all the post-production and everything. So, I mean, it's not just talking. I also I bring the guests, because my network with our community at Dynatrace, the CNCF community, so I have good connections to always find guests. But what we tried to do is, and what we kept is, since we've been doing it, we do a podcast episode every second week. This is also what you need for consistency. I'm sure you guys know this as well. You need to have consistency. This will help you in recognition, and this will help you, I guess, also with all the different algorithms that then eventually bubble up your podcast amongst the millions of others that are out there. And and I've always found the most interesting thing for me was that I always try to pick guests where I definitely can learn something, right? Because I want to pick guests that are experts in the field where I don't have expertise in, because this allows me to learn something. So at least the hour that I spent in recording the podcast, it's an hour well spent, because I learned something, whether we have listeners or no. I know we have listeners, but that's always good. And we just pre-COVID, I was traveling a lot with different conferences, meeting different people. And so when I thought, hey, this is an interesting speaker at this conference, talk about an interesting topic that is adjacent to the performance kind of main theme that we have, then I asked them, do you want to become a guest on my podcast? and that always helped. And so, yes, 8 years later, we had, as I just said earlier, the 201st episode, and we were lucky in the early days to have people like Goranka. She was the head of performance and site reliability engineering at Facebook. We had Kelsey Hightower. Um, we had Gene Kim talking about DevOps, right? We had many amazing guests that I would have probably not had on the podcast if we wouldn't be persistent with, kind of building up a reputation. Some luck, obviously, there's always some luck that you happen to be at a conference and you happen to meet this person, and then all of them are really helpful and they are willing to get on the podcast. And so this is how the path kind of went, and here we are. And now I'm with Will and Warren. I mean, what else can I ask for?
I don't know. I kind of think that's the top.
I know.
Like, where do you go from here?
I know. I think I just follow your lead and I shut down my email and retire, right?
Go off the grid, buy a typewriter and a cabin in Montana.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, he said he was super motivated to talk about platform engineering. And I feel like I've heard this term throughout my entire career. And to this day, I still couldn't tell you what that means.
Yeah. So, funny enough, I'll give you my explanation in a second. But funny enough, I was on a, it was not a podcast. It was similar to this, but it was like a discussion where we were 2 and 2 on each side. And one were saying DevOps is dead, and the other ones were saying, no, DevOps is not dead. So kind of like DevOps is dead, platform engineering is the new thing. And then the others, and this is where I was, DevOps is not dead, because I have, been talking about DevOps for many, many years. And so they put me on that area, on that side. But coming back to platform engineering, I think platform engineering is trying to solve one big problem, which is that currently when you try to build software, test it, deploy it, operate it, you need to know a lot of things, right? A lot of different technology. The technology we work on is very complex, and especially if you then try to scale this, if you're not like a small startup like the three of us, but if we are 100, 500, 1,000 engineers in an organization, and you ask from every engineering team to do everything end to end, then you probably end up with a lot of duplicated work, with a lot of wasted time, because everybody tries to figure out how to build, how to deploy, how to patch, how to do security, how to do network. And so platform engineering, from my perspective, tries to provide what's called golden paths. So in an organization, right, if you are, I don't know, if you are an organization that is heavy, let's say, on building Java-based applications, because that's your skill set, then you provide golden paths where developers can go to a portal and say, I need to build a new Java-based microservice or a new Java-based app. And then the platform engineering team provides a self-service portal where, as a developer, I can go in. I don't need to care about how it gets built, how it gets deployed. I don't need to care about security, because all of this is baked in by the platform engineering team. So the platform engineering team is essentially building an internal product that solves problems of internal customers, which are developers, so that they can focus on writing code instead of having to figure out how to package the code, how to push it out into the different environments, how to do automated performance and load testing, how to do security checks. So platform engineering, in a simple sense, is fulfilling the promise of DevOps at enterprise scale by providing it as a self-service. And I think it's a longer answer than I anticipated, but that's...
No, I would like to add to that a little bit too, because the way that I treat platform engineering is it's about putting guardrails in place, because every company has financial, operational, security, and legal constraints about how they operate their business. And so I treat platform engineering as a way of putting guardrails in place so that someone from the engineering team can get from their application idea to production while meeting all of those constraints, even when they don't know what those constraints are. It's sort of like When you go to the bowling alley and you put the bumpers in the gutters along the side so that no matter what you do, your ball's going to make it down and at least hit the pins. I kind of treat platform engineering as the same way. We're putting in the bumpers to keep your bowling ball from falling off into the gutter.
I liked it. Yeah. It's a great analogy. I may borrow it at some point.
I'm pretty sure I borrowed it from someone else. I just don't
Heard
remember
it here
who.
first.
Yeah. And I think maybe one other thing to platform engineering is platform engineering doesn't solve 100% of the problems that you have in your organization. I think as platform engineering teams, you should, like with any product that you build, right? You want to figure out what are the pain points of 80% of your engineers. Where do 80% of your engineers waste their time in things that they shouldn't waste their time on? And then come up with an easier way for them to do it. And this could be something simple as, create a wiki page to explain how to create a new project with at least the basic security scans. But it can be something as sophisticated as building an IDP, an internal development platform, using tools like Backstage, Port.io, or others, where a developer just clicks on a button and then fills out a couple of fields, and then out comes a fully configured Git repository with pipelines, with security scans, with observability built in. And so I think the point is, you need to, like when building any type of product, you first need to understand who is your end user and why would your end user use your product? What pain do they have that you can solve? And if you figure that out in an organization, then you are also set up for success, because the other way around would be somebody hears platform engineering is the cool thing. So let's build a platform. And then you build the platform, and then the platform doesn't help anybody in your organization because it doesn't solve problems that their people have right now.
No, I think that's a really important point that often gets missed. Like if we're talking about platform teams as a team topology concept, then what's often missing, I can't believe still today, is what you're essentially saying is product management from that platform team so that they know what they're working on the right things.
Yeah. And this is also why what I try to stress, coming back to observability, right? Because that's what I do on a day-to-day basis with any product, whether it's let's say your e-commerce website that you're building. You want to monitor how many people are using it and how much money do you make. The same is true for your platform. If you're building a platform, you want to know, do you have one development team that uses it because they feel sad for you if they don't use it because they're your friends? Or do you have 80% of your development teams use it because you actually solve a problem? And are they becoming more efficient in their work? So that's why you also need to observe the success and the adoption of a platform. And therefore, you need to solve a problem. And very importantly, your platform itself also needs to be available at the time when your developers need it. It needs to be resilient and it needs to be performing. Because if at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, and all of your developers come back from the weekend and they all have a great idea, they all start writing new stuff and they use your platform and say, I have a new idea, and all of a sudden your platform crashes, then you also miss the point. So you need to treat it as a product, and therefore you need to apply all the principles of software engineering to that product.
Makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of the big misconceptions there that both of you have addressed is that your engineering teams are your customer. And the misconception is that they don't have to choose your platform. As a customer, they're free to go elsewhere. And so unless you have that frequent communication with them and really understand what their problems are, they will go somewhere else.
Exactly.
I seen the problem actually even go further than that. Whereas, like, if you just count the number of teams that are using your thing, you don't know if they're actually getting the value out, right? If your platform is going to fall over one day, that could certainly be a problem. I've seen organizations mandate the use of internal tools that have been built, which can slow the teams down and whatnot. I mean, I assume the list of problems here goes on and on. I'm sure Andy has quite a few number of horror stories.
Yeah, I mean that's I think this is what I said earlier, right? Certain things in certain industry have to be mandated because there's no way around. You cannot just allow I don't know, somebody in the financial or in highly regulated areas or in governments to just pick any cloud vendor in any geo. That's just not possible. So certain rules of engagement, certain guardrails have to be there. But if you come back to understanding the pain point of your internal customers and then making their life easier, it will be a success. If you think you know what your customers, your internal customers need without even talking to them and building something, chances of success are lower. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and that's a hard conversation to have, right? Because you're going to go up to someone, and it's the same for all areas of your life. You know, you have to walk up to someone and say, hey, what am I doing that's actually not helping you? Or what can I do to help you better? And so you're going to get that feedback that's just going to like chip away. You know, you walk into the conversation thinking, damn, I nailed this. And then you have this conversation and they start chipping it away at it. And it's feedback that some people don't want to hear, but it's absolutely critical if you're going to have a successful platform initiative.
When people really like negative feedback,
right?
Yeah. So I just had the pleasure. We just had our annual user conference from Dynatrace 2 weeks ago, and I had the pleasure to have Marcio Lena from Dell on stage. And he was also, he was talking about how they brought observability as a self-service into their internal platform. And I asked him, what are the measures, the KPIs that you are reporting back to your leadership that actually shows that your team, your platform team that is bringing observability in is actually successful and has any impact? And I think I need to look at the actual numbers, but it's all, the recording is available. But one of the things that they measured is they were surveying their engineers and say, how much time do you currently, spend in coding versus doing things that is considered toil? And they went from something like 36% productive to 80% productive.
Wow.
Right? Because they received a platform, or they were given a platform that really solves problems, that was, taking away work from them that could be automated by making it easier to get their logs, metrics, and tracing without them having to figure out where to write the log, how to create metrics. They just, Marcio and his team, they just invested a lot of time. They were investing in faster pipelines, in more resilient pipelines. So he showed some numbers on how many million of pipeline runs they have, increased in a matter of a year or two, which means faster turnaround, faster software development and experimentation. So it's really fantastic. And so this is like the reason why I asked him, what metrics did you use to kind of show the success? I was really blown away by, the toil, how much that went down, the number of pipelines they ran. That means how many more releases they pushed out. Also, I think he had one interesting metric. Again, we are coming from an observability perspective or background. The mean time to instrumentation. How long does it take you to actually get the instrumentation? And it was fantastic, right?
A good twist on the original Dora metric.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get the metrics right after our first production outage.
How do you measure? Do you measure by the number of negative tweets, or what do you do?
Right.
I mean, I've heard a number of companies, though, they talk about gray failures that are ones that it's not so obvious that there's a problem and that it requires external feedback, that a set of serial requests or something like that achieve too high a latency, for instance. And so having that stream seems super valuable to be able to know immediately by watching the API from some third-party social platform as a observability tool.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was half joking earlier. I know that. I hope what I was saying is, I hope that you have more observability than just monitoring the social feedback on the feedback on the social media.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, I know we have customers of Dynatrace, and they are pulling in data from the Twitter API and
interesting.
whatever other APIs, social media, to get a kind of like a sentiment of what's going on out there. Yeah.
Wow.
That's going to be Elon's new monetized product, is using X as an observability platform.
That would require people to still be using it.
Yeah. That's true. And I stopped the commenting here because I don't know who's listening in. Yeah.
Right over.
We all have careers on the line here. So next topic, please.
Yeah.
And awkward silence.
No,
I mean, it was really interesting. I was actually listening to some of your more recent podcasts to see how it's changed over time, and one of them really intrigued me was the one on AI coming up, and I figured it'd be a topic, and whatever interest you have or insight you've got there is certainly poignant for whatever is happening in DevOps today.
Yeah, I mean, AI is a topic I think we all need to figure out what that means going forward, right? Because we're all, I think, at least from my side, I'm both excited yet not scared, but I think we need to be very careful with what we do with it, and I think that's something we as an industry, even as a as humans, we need to figure this out as a society. Now, from what I believe, where AI is obviously great help, as you can tell from my accent and from my not perfect English, AI helps me a lot when I write things, so that I don't make grammar mistakes, because that's what this is great for. It also helps a lot of people to write code, not coming up maybe with new cool algorithms, but at least writing boilerplate code that otherwise is just a time consumer, right? And now the question is, right, if we are ending up creating and letting AI generate a lot of code, and then nobody understands that code anymore, then how can we tell if that code is not doing something that we didn't expect, or even in the future something malicious, right? Because if we had one of our keynote speakers at our conference, she was heavily involved in AI and AI research and in the security aspect, and she was saying that if hackers infiltrate the training material of AIs that generate code, then who knows, maybe the AI generates some backdoor into your code that can then be taken over by somebody. So this brings me back actually to where I started my conversation in the beginning. If we are trusting the stuff that is given to us without understanding what's happening, then we may end up with the next big performance problem, resiliency problem, or security problem.
I mean, for sure, we know that it's possible to poison the ML models so that the result is problematic. It's obviously a short jump there to get to the next step, where you could do it in a way which causes a real problem or opens a back door, like you said. That's a really good point. Do you see it happening in like the observability space? Like, is there just anomaly detection, or are there things on top of that you see coming down the pipeline that really are a real step forward that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I see. So I think this is not only true for observability, but with many areas and products where you have a lot of people that need to use these tools, but not on a day-to-day basis, which means they're not experts. So, right, if I look at our product, at our competitors' product, they're extremely powerful products, but most people only interact with, let's say, the data that comes out in case there's a problem. So maybe this happens once a week, maybe this happens once a month. If you only interact with a tool once per month, it's going to be very challenging. You're not going to be efficient. So one way how AI can help you, and that's also what we've built into the product, and I believe our competition has done it as well, or other players in this space, is using a generative AI to say, explain that data to me, or create a dashboard for this particular incident so that I understand what's going on for the area of the code that I'm responsible for. So using generative AI to really become more efficient with a complex tool, with complex data, when you don't work with it on a day-to-day basis, when you're basically not an expert. And I think that's where it's huge help. And that's the same with with code generation just on any type of business code, right? Because you don't write that maybe certain basic algorithms, every day. And I can either then look it up if I need a special sort algorithm on Stack Overflow and then copy it in, or I just say, hey, Copilot, I need please sort this array in the most efficient way. Right? That's a cool thing. And I see that this is there. Another thing that and that's kind of my opinion, in one area in the observability space is standardization. So we have OpenTelemetry as a standard to collect data. And the industry is kind of trying to figure out a way, how can we not only standardize the way we collect data, but how can we also standardize the way we analyze the data that is collected? So like, shall we come up with a standard query language? Shall we come up with something? And I believe that these generative AIs actually have the power to maybe not solve it, but to mitigate this problem, because I can say, today I'm using tool X, and please, Copilot, give me that data in tool X. Tomorrow I'm moving to tool Y, and I can still, in natural language, say, give me that data, and I don't know what the language is that they're using to query this data, but just give it to me because you're the expert, right? Copilot, you're the expert. So I think that could also solve this problem.
It's interesting you brought up data. I feel like I've been hearing forever, like, we have to save all of our data. It used to be for testing. And so companies piled on, magnetic tape backups of whatever worthless thing they had. And then it's moved to user analytics and maybe business analytics. And I still feel like every company I worked for didn't know what they were doing with it. And now it's, maybe we can write some ML on top of it. At best, a LLM model to, I don't know, generate stuff. Do you think that's changing? Like, are there still like a majority of the data that companies are saving just isn't worth anything, and now it's changing, or they're still finding the important aspect in whatever you're saving?
That is a very tough question to answer. I think we are still probably saving, on the one side, too much data, and that is also not well structured, which means the only way to make sense with this is actually to come up with algorithms and using, I guess, ML systems to kind of make sense of this data. But on the other side, I believe we have the opportunity now to educate people. First of all, to use standards, to come up with good practices on structured logging, on when you use traces, what should be on a trace, when you're creating metrics, what metrics make sense and what dimensions should they have, and also come up with some best practices. On the other side, what we do, at least from the company I work for, right, we try to connect the data, because what we've seen historically, many organizations in the observability space started somewhere, right? We at Dynatrace, we started with tracing. So we've been doing tracing for the last 20 years. And then we added, metrics and logs and real user monitoring. Others, I'm sure, like Splunk, for instance, right? They started from logs and then they expanded into other areas. And I think many vendors out there right now, and especially if you, let's say, do it yourself and you put in, you create your own observability platform, you have data silos where you have your logs, your metrics, your traces, your events, and so on. And this actually makes it very hard to then analyze the data and put the context in. And so one of the things that we at least try to solve is, as we ingest the data, we connect it, we enrich it with topology information, so we know that this log comes from this trace, from this service, from this Kubernetes cluster, from this end user. And with that, we are also more efficient when we run our AI over the data, when we do analytics. And as I said, I can only speak what we are doing. Maybe others are doing it as well. But I think the problem that we need to solve as an industry is, don't just collect data because you can, but think about, when you collect the data, what type of data is it? What's the meaning of it? How does it connect to other data? What are your expectations? What do you expect this data to be? Right? Because we're talking about data observability. If you have let's say a percentage number that should be between 0 and 100, and if all of a sudden 500 comes in, there's something wrong. And I'm sure this is the same with other things too. So you wanna make sure that the data is clean, that the data is accurate, and that you only collect data that actually really makes sense in the end, because then we can we can also make it easier to analyze the data in the end.
Having a plan before you start, it's always a good idea.
It's always a good idea. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and to me, that highlights like one of the big advantages of using a, not only a performance tool like Dynatrace, but having organizations like the CNCF that can, because there's a lot of work in making all those decisions, right? And you have to have a ton of expertise in that area to even know what the right questions are to be asking, much less even get to an answer. And so that's where I think having those resources available to someone like myself who's just trying to write application code to run my business actually helps, because then I can use your expertise to solve problems that I didn't even know I was going to have. And I think that's a hard mental shift for some people, especially younger people. Like, oh, I can just write this myself, and then I don't have to use this product, or I don't have to sign up for this subscription service. But there are some long-term benefits to, using the product created by a team of 1,000 engineers who are solving problems that I'm not even aware of.
I just want to add one comment. It's not only the young people that think they know everything better. It's also some old people that think
fair
they
point.
know better.
Fair point.
And I include myself sometimes, right? Sometimes you just think you have seen this before and you know it much better. But you're right. Yeah. No, the CNCF and especially everything that is happening. I mean, I'm very happy about open telemetry already, obviously, right? It's in the observability space, and how everybody's collaborating here. All the big vendors are collaborating, bringing in their expertise, contributing to different types of agents for instrumenting application code automatically, and then enriching it with open telemetry. Or we have launched 2 years ago now almost open feature to standardize feature flagging, and a lot of companies are contributing to it. It's really great to see what the CNCF does, because it breaks down a lot of these barriers and walls that you normally have between competing organizations.
For sure. Yeah, because that's a definite change. All three of us have been in this industry long enough to know that was not how this industry started. Like back in the late 90s, early 2000s, to think that Microsoft was going to do something collaborative with another company was just completely unheard of.
Yeah.
Yet here we are.
Yeah, we always make the comment. I think Brian, he always makes the comment. This is no longer the Microsoft that I knew.
Right.
When I grew up. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting you bring up the collaboration. I see one of the things that comes up is that a lot of these tools are still incredibly expensive for small scale, and I see that being a reason that especially individual contributors, if they're just trying something out or building, want to even or are motivated to do it themselves. Actually, it's interesting. We actually have a similar problem at Authorist that we're trying to solve, that's just on the metric side. And it's just such a small amount of metrics that we want to collect from a volume standpoint, but high number of dimensions. And it's difficult to find something that purpose fits what we're looking for without jumping into a giant product that has a lot of different bells and whistles that go in a lot of different directions. And the cloud provider we're utilizing right now just fails in that regard, which makes it a real struggle.
Well, I mean, this is the reason why, as you said, right, there are our organizations that have thousands of engineers, and they're really solving the tough problems like high cardinality, lots of data, lots of metrics, lots of dimensions. But as you said, not 100% of organizations have this problem right away, and therefore, for a long time, it's completely perfectly fine and to use solutions that are free and that are open source. But at some point, there's a reason why commercial companies exist, and that invest like we have more than 1,000 engineers worldwide. We're not just sitting there and doing nothing and just collecting the checks. We're actually we solved some of these challenging problems that many of our customers have. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Trying to make sure that even a container you run of an open source project inside your cluster or on a machine is incredibly difficult to get a high reliability out of it and configured in an optimal way for your environment.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not a trivial challenge.
yeah. And maybe that's one comment to this, and I know we are probably already way over time, but I wanted to add one more thing coming back to the AI question that you had earlier. Because what you just said is it's very hard to configure and know how to correctly configure your Kubernetes nodes, your pods, your resource limits, your request limits. And again, this is also something where I believe where AI can help us, or whatever you want to call it, right? Is basically using best practices and things we've learned from other systems and then apply it to workloads we now see. So we're working with a partner company in Italy. I'll just give them a quick shout out because maybe somebody's interested in Akamas, and they are doing they're running experiments, AI-driven experiments, where they are finding the optimal setting for your JVMs, your CLRs, for your containers, for your Kubernetes clusters. And they look at observability data, and then you give them a goal. You said, hey, I want to optimize memory and CPU, but I also don't want to jeopardize my performance. So you can set them goals, and then they find the right configuration based on some machine learning that some models that they built, and they have some really interesting numbers. And I'm not an expert in Kubernetes down to every single configuration line, but this is where, again, I would go to at least AI to support me and say, this is what I would recommend, because I've analyzed thousands of systems, and therefore I give you this recommendation if I see your system. Yeah. And then I can decide whether I want to go with this recommendation or not.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and on the other side of that, I find one of the common things I do with AI is whenever I come across configuration or some code that someone else has written, I'll just paste it over into AI and say, can you explain what this does?
Yeah. 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 And obviously what this in the end means, there will definitely be certain jobs that will be less in demand because they will definitely be replaced by AI. But I think this also gives us a much better opportunity to think about, instead of doing the same mundane thing all over, I hopefully have now more time to think about how I can contribute my brain power to something that an AI cannot solve.
Right. Yeah. If your career passion is creating security groups inside an AWS VPC, AI might be a career limiter for you. But if you would just prefer to move on with something a little more fun, I don't think AI is at risk of taking your job away.
Yeah.
I think continual learning is always a requirement as technology evolves. I've seen AI disrupt more companies though than individual jobs in a lot of areas. So, like giant companies that, like, let's say Stack Overflow, disrupt it. But as far as individuals and their abilities, that's still an open question as far as when that will happen.
Yeah, I agree.
For sure. All right. Should we move on and do some picks? Let's do it. Warren, I'm going to put you on the spot. Have you got a pick for us this week?
Again, have to spend all week thinking about this. This is going to be my new column here.
It's a new part-time job.
That's actually more challenging than doing the preparation for the episode, honestly. This one, I think I figured out, though. In a couple of weeks, I'll actually be in Dresden for the Decompiled conference in Germany. I'm actually giving a talk there on how at Authris we iteratively added security as we grew both our technology product and our organization, and I'm sharing that with who's ever else there. But there's a lot of interesting talks for the one-day conference that's there. So shout out to Decompiled. I'm sure I'll bring it up again before I actually have to hop over for that.
Right on. Andy, you were pretty excited about doing picks. What have you got for us?
I actually got two for you. Is that okay?
Okay? Oh, absolutely.
So first the fun thing. So I think it's very important in life. We spend a lot of time in our job, even though we love it and we're passionate. It's a lot of time. I think you still need to have something outside of your regular work that kind of keeps you gets your mind off. Mine is salsa dancing, and
Nice.
I know there's a lot of salsa dancers, or at least dancers in our industry. So if you have not yet tried salsa, you should. And the good news is, in any city where I've traveled, and I've traveled quite a bit, there's typically always a salsa community, and salsa communities have been around for a little while. So most of them still organize themselves on Facebook. So if you are kind of post Facebook generation, because you're much younger than we are, then this might still be a good thing to go on. And then you just say salsa in Boston, salsa in Los Angeles, you'll find it. So that's I love it. When I travel, I go dancing, and it keeps my mind off. It also is, it's an exercise, so it keeps me fit and healthy as well.
Right on.
Yeah. And then the second thing is just a little tip. I'm not sure if people are watching still, but on the weekend I went ski hiking. So like not downhill skiing, but I think it's
Cross country.
Not cross country, but you actually go up on the high hills, on the peaks.
Okay.
Ski touring. Yeah. And unfortunately, we have it's like too warm right now. So that means we had to get very high up to actually get some snow. And then it was so warm, and I thought I can just be cool, and I just, go with my short sleeves and my shorts, and nothing will ever happen. Well, my wife disapproves. She was like seeing me when I was like, I made a wrong step, and I was sliding down only a couple of meters, but on the ice and the snow, I have a couple of bruises. And so, folks, if you think, even if it's a warm day and you think you have no problem on skis because you will never drip or slip, don't do it. Just wear something long sleeves. It's just better. It's painful otherwise. It's been painful for 2 days now. But also fun.
Right on. So I have 2 picks this week as well. If you've been listening to the last few episodes, you won't be surprised at my first pick, and that is for Platform Con coming up here this spring. Platform Con is great. It's a 5-day free virtual event on platform engineering, and there's just tons and tons of great speakers lined up. So if you heard what we were talking about on platform engineering today, and you're interested and want to figure out how that can actually make your life easier, make your team's life easier, make your company more successful, there'll at least be a few talks to check out on Platform Con. And then at the end, I'm doing a live Q&A session with some of the conference speakers. So that's going to be fun. And then my second pick is for Obi Vincent. Obi is he's a personal trainer from the UK, but he has a great website and focuses on a lot of kettlebell type workouts. And I'm a huge fan of kettlebells. As of this last year, I've been working with kettlebells exclusively for about the last year. And he's got some workouts and some guides and some tips and stuff on his website, obivincent.com, on how to effectively use the kettlebell and get a great workout in with those. So if you've never done kettlebells, or you're looking to try to get into working out, kettlebells are just super cool because it's a low barrier to entry, and it's dynamic. And actually, I've noticed in the last year of using kettlebells, I'm 53 now, but I've actually gotten stronger by stopping using barbells for working out and using kettlebells, just because it tends to line up with how our bodies want to move anyway, which translates to greater strength improvements. So yeah, go check out obivincent.com.
Do you have some in that room there that you want to show off?
No, they're actually out in the shop, but I can bring some in for next week's episode for sure.
To show off his gear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got about 500 pounds of kettlebells in different sizes.
Wow.
Yeah. That's definitely not needed. That's
this is a caveat there.
Yeah. Don't hear that and think, my God, I've got to finance this. No, you can just grab one kettlebell and start with there. So for sure.
That's like the upper limit. If you're hitting that number, maybe you need to see Obi.
Right. or maybe like talk to your therapist about what you're really not focusing on in life. But that's a subject for a different podcast. Awesome. Well, Andy, thank you so much, man. This has been a great conversation.
Fantastic.
I really enjoyed having you on the show.
Thanks for having
Warren,
me. And
yeah.
yeah, as I said,
17 more years. We'll get you back.
17 more years, and I will be back. Yeah.
I'll put it on my calendar. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Warren, thanks for joining me. Love
of
having
course.
you as my co-host. It's been a blast, and I look forward to many, many future episodes with you.
Definitely.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for listening. And be sure and check out the Pure Performance podcast as well if you aren't already. And we will see y'all next week.
See you then. Thanks, Andy. Bye.